Hey, Larken Rose here. And invariably, when I make fun of people who vote for a master and point out that you tried to appoint a master over yourself and you got a master over yourself, that's not how you get to freedom. Whenever I point that out, invariably there'll be a bunch of people who say, "You don't offer any solutions." What they mean is, I don't offer any solutions that fit within the paradigm and the way they've always thought. I offer the only solution, literally the only solution to statism and authoritarianism. And in a second, I'll describe why it's the only solution. But it's a little bit like somebody, "Oh no, that you have a fire in your house. Quick, grab some gasoline to throw on it." And if I say, "Don't throw gasoline on it, that'll make it worse." "Oh, so you just don't want me to do anything about it?" "No, I don't want you to do something that'll make it worse." "So you think that not throwing gasoline on it will put the fire out?" Nope. You have to not throw gasoline on it and then do something else to put the fire out. So when I make fun of people for voting and choosing a master, and I say, "Don't vote, it's stupid," it legitimizes the game in the eyes of people and things like that. They decide for some reason, because they're being emotional and defensive, that I mean that if you just don't vote, everything will magically fix. No. The only solution is disobey and resist. If somebody claims the right to rule you, the only way that stops is if you disobey and resist. Now, of course, that depends on how many people disobey and resist, which is why step one, which is entirely what most of my life is focused on, is getting more and more people to give up statism and the insane belief in authority so they stop feeling like they're obligated to obey whatever crap the political parasites and psychopaths decide to call law. You're not. The law doesn't matter. That's just a word they use to describe the arbitrary crap they make up and then indoctrinate you into thinking that all good people would obey the law, which just means the politicians and demands of power-happy pieces of crap. No, that's not at all a measure of your goodness. So yeah, it's a numbers game. It depends how many people disobey and resist. But there's a reason I say that disobeying and resisting is the only solution. Because anything that isn't disobeying and resisting is, by definition, obeying and going along with those who claim the right to rule you. Cooperating with a slave master doesn't get you to freedom. Disobeying and resisting the slave master can, if there's enough people, and if it's, there's 1,000 different ways they can do it. So I can say it's the one solution, but it may look a whole bunch of different ways, because there's a whole bunch of different ways to disobey and resist and not go along with the power-happy psychos. But overall, generally speaking, the only solution is to disobey and resist, because anything else, by definition, means going along with them. And so that has nothing to do with protesting or voting or running for office. Those are all just ways to try to whine to the rulers to have them give you permission to be a little bit more free, which is not going to make you actually be free ever. So, 2 steps. Get as many people as possible to understand that they own themselves, and then get those people to disobey and resist. Now, a lot of people are like, "Oh, well, that doesn't work. If you disobey, you just think ignoring them will make you be free." A bunch of people say this too. By yourself, no. It may make a tank end up in your living room. You will probably get killed in a hail of gunfire if all by yourself, you and you alone, decide to disobey and resist, unless you can run off and hide somewhere and not get noticed. If so, more power to you. Good job. But the overall solution for society, not just a given individual, is enough people disobeying and resisting. Now, the beauty of this is it doesn't have to be everybody. It doesn't even have to be a majority. It doesn't even have to be a very big minority. There's a bunch of people who will say, "Well, they won't let us. The state is too powerful and too big." And the state is always vastly outnumbered by the people it claims the right to rule. But I wanted to spell this out because it's sort of simple and obvious when you understand it. But so many people have been trained to think that no, the only civil, proper response to authoritarianism and injustice is to whine a bunch and protest and then vote for your next abuser and see how that turns out. How's that going for you so far? Because the idea of disobedience is just outside of the realm of anything they ever hear in the media. Like, how often do you hear Republican or Democrat politicians say, you know what you should do is disobey all of us. We give commands and demand money from you. You should not give us money and don't do what we say. None of them are ever going to say that because all of them, left and right, sought out positions of power because they want to rule you. That's why they did it. That's what they do when they get there. So, I'm going to describe something that should be pretty easy to imagine. Imagine if 10%, we're just going to do the US for now. You could do the whole world, whatever. If 10% of people in the US were magically voluntarists tomorrow, for some reason, 10% of the population, just 1 in 10 Americans, thought about it really hard tonight and said, yeah, I think you're right. Political authority is bogus and illegitimate, and I have no obligation to obey. Now, there still can be consequences, like you're also not obligated to obey a carjacker or a thug of the mafia. It doesn't mean they can't break your kneecaps and hurt you. So the fact that you may have no obligation to obey somebody doesn't mean bad things won't happen if you resist. But consider the scenario of just 10% of the population, which is 30-some million people, just 1 in 10 Americans, if they magically turn into voluntarists by tomorrow morning. Now, first of all, what happens if those 1 in 10 run off and vote? Nothing. You lose. You're only 10% of the population. You play the stupid game. You're still dominated by a bunch of psychopaths. So yeah, that's a really stupid thing to do if only 10% of the population actually wants freedom, is play a game where you're letting the other 90% tell you you have to be a subject of a ruling class. So that's out the window as a stupid idea. Let's start with taxes. If 30-some million people in this country said, we're not going to hand over money to the IRS or the state thieves anymore. We're not going to pay up. We're not going to file. We're not going to tell them what we're doing. We're not going to squeal on each other by reporting what we pay people with 1099s and all that and W-2s. We're not going to withhold from each other if I work for you or you work for me. I'm not going to rob you or let you rob me on behalf of the ruling class. Us 30-some million people are going to start trading in a way that we don't tell the ruling class about it and we don't give them a cut. And we can have our own banks and stuff that don't cooperate with liens and levies. Right now, if you have your money in a bank and the IRS goes to the bank and says, hey bank, give us that guy's money, they go, yes sir, right away. If you have private people who don't believe in the divine right of politicians, then they have banks and the IRS comes and says, give us their money, and they say, no, screw you, then that doesn't work. So, just 1/10 of the population. Now you're going to say, well, they're going to arrest you. Really? They're going to arrest 34, what are we up to? 34 million people. Really? You think they have space for 34 million people? And here's a little problem. They have to put those people on trial. Now, this is if people don't even resist. This is if people disobey and get caught and passively go along with it, which I'm not suggesting. I'm all in favor of actual resistance. But even if people all the way went along with it, it would absolutely crush the system. 30-some million people just openly going, we're not doing this. We're trading without telling you, without withholding, without reporting and squealing on each other, without going along with your extortion. You don't get to know it. And if the ruling class decide, well, we're going to prosecute all of you, how long do you think it would take them to prosecute 34 million people? And where do you think they would put those 34 million people? Nowhere. They can't possibly. And that's if nobody resists. If people do resist, and every 10th or 20th person that they say, we're going to prosecute you for not paying tribute to the ruling class, actually resisted by force when the government thugs showed up to take their property by force or to arrest them by force, how long do you think there would be anybody working for the IRS? If 30-some million people feel no obligation to hand over their money to you and just view you as mafia thugs, how fun do you think your job is going to be? Oh, we're going to go door to door. Give me door to door. Give me a bunch of your money. Bam! Oh, that didn't go well. If 1 in 100 people actually forcibly resisted, that's the end of the IRS. You think anybody's going to work there? It's like, oh, let's see how many case files I have on my desk now. Okay, 20 people I have to contact. Wonder if any of them are going to kill me. I wonder if maybe I should choose a different career. That's the end of the income tax. Even if a tiny fraction, if it's a tenth of the people just disobey and don't go along, and a tiny fraction of those actually forcibly resist, that's the end of the IRS and the income tax and withholding and any other tax they want to ignore. It's just gone with hardly any resistance needed. Now, the same thing with 80 million other stupid laws. Prohibition of firearms or marijuana or whatever. If a tenth of the population, 30-some million people, just said, yeah, we're going to disobey this. And by the way, we feel no obligation to let you put us in a cage if you catch us with a gun that you didn't give us permission to have, or with a plant that you told us not to have. So once again, some of us, you don't know how many, if you come to take us away at gunpoint and put us in cages, bad things are going to happen to you. And even if they didn't, you do not have the resources to prosecute 30-some million people. And even if you did, you don't have anywhere to put 30-some million people. It just collapses the entire game. And that's just a tenth of the population. And again, you can go right down the line of like, oh, we're going to produce things without getting a government permit and a government license and this and that and the other thing and paying these special taxes and excise this. We're going to build stuff on our own property without asking the local or state or federal parasites for permission, or asking to see your 8 bajillion page pile of bullshit from the UN describing down to the detail every dumb little thing that has to be in place in something that somebody builds on their own property. We're just going to ignore that crap. Yeah, but then they're going to come and shut you down. Well, if it's just you, or 10 people, or 100 people maybe, then they can. If it's 30-some million people, how the hell do you think they're going to do that? That literally outnumbers everybody they have combined. If people just said, we're not going to ask your permission anymore for what we build or what we produce, what we build, what we sell, how we trade with each other, the currencies we use, the mediums of exchange we use, we're going to do it without getting your stupid licenses and paying your stupid taxes. And in every single trade there is, if you get 30-some million people saying, we're just going to do, you can call it a black market and demonize it. How dare you trade without the blessing of the ruling class? Well, yeah, if tomorrow 30-some million of us don't give a crap about your blessing and your imaginary authority, you're doomed. You have no power over us. It's just gone. And that's just 1/10 of the population. So the black market becomes the entire market. And then there's this fun little tidbit. People might have to stay on the voter rolls on purpose. If 1/10 of the population starting tomorrow believes in self-ownership and doesn't believe in the authority of government and the divine right of politicians, well, we're gonna prosecute all those disobeying people. Okay, where are you gonna get a jury? Jury of 12 people. Whoops. Now there's a pretty good chance that one of the people, at least, on the jury is gonna refuse to convict because he doesn't acknowledge your power or your right to do anything either. Now you can't get people to convict. And by the way, in limited ways, this has totally happened. It happened with slavery. It happened again with alcohol prohibition, where tons of people were just disobeying. People were helping slaves escape and disobeying the laws. And then people on juries were refusing to convict people for violating the fugitive slave laws because they recognized those laws are freaking evil. Yeah, that guy totally broke that law, and we're still going to say not guilty because this is evil BS. Same thing with alcohol prohibition. People were bootlegging all over the place. And And juries weren't convicting anymore. They'd go, yeah, he was like had a still in his backyard and drank some whiskey. Like, we're not going to let you lock him up for that. And this is why jury nullification really is a thing, where if a jury goes, yeah, that you can call that the law, but if the people on the jury say, screw you, we're not going to convict, like, too bad. Your law falls apart, it becomes unenforceable, and you might as well repeal it, as happened with the slave laws and alcohol prohibition, among other things. And to some degree now, marijuana prohibition, which has been falling apart for a while. So if people don't go along, and a tenth of the population, which is 1/10 is more than 1/12. And if you have 12 people on a jury and you have to get all of them to say guilty, if one of them doesn't, how much time and resources does the ruling class have to pile into each prosecution, which is already a lot, and just hope you don't get that one guy on the jury who said, yeah, not guilty for the tax thing, the firearms thing, the marijuana, the having a business without a license. We don't give a crap. We're going to keep saying not guilty. And a tenth of us is fine. Now, if it's a fifth of us, a quarter of us, whatever, gets better and better, it gets easier and easier. I'm just giving the example of a tenth to show how easy it is for a tiny minority of the population to disobey out of existence any regime. But I want to end with this, because this is crucial. Like, I give this hypothetical, obviously it's sort of silly. Tomorrow most people are still going to be status. But I gave the hypothetical of tomorrow a tenth of the population suddenly no longer feels an obligation to bow to or pay tribute to the ruling class. They've outgrown the superstition of authority. Now they're human beings. They recognize that they own themselves and don't own a damn thing, owe a damn thing to the political parasites. But there's another aspect. Because if a tenth of the population believed that and 90% didn't, it doesn't just end there. Because then the 90% would be hearing on a regular basis from people saying, you know, you own yourselves too. You aren't obligated to pay these bastards either. And by the way, if you want to disobey, like if you're filling out your taxes like a good little citizen, and you go, it's so expensive. If you want to say screw that and not pay them, well, there's already 30-some million people ahead of you in line for them having to come after us. So even if you're still a statist and you theoretically believe in government, you can disobey and get away with it. How many people do you think are going to file and pay tribute to the IRS and the ruling class if they knew they'd get away with it if they didn't? Nobody. Pretty much nobody, including all the people out there cheering for higher taxes, because they don't want higher taxes on themselves. If they did, they could just donate money. So even among statists, most people, the moment they think, oh, I could do that and get away with it, they will. Like the 80 gazillion people who smoke pot recreationally in places where it's still illegal. If they were like, oh, well, if no jury's going to convict me, and if 80 gazillion other people are doing it to the point where they can't nearly even try to go after us, okay, I'll disobey that too. And then on top of the expanding disobedience, which would go from 10% to basically 100 really damn quickly for all the bogus stupid laws, there's that little thing of as soon as 10% of the population understands some fundamental truth, it's going to be everybody. Because everybody's going to hear about it. And now it's going to be mainstream because a tenth of the people believing something makes a discussion turn mainstream, even though they're still a tiny minority. And you'll hear lots of people talking in front of the whole world about why do you feel obligated to pay tribute to these crooks? Where all those people, those 90% devout statists, up until now, mostly all they've ever heard is, do you want to lick the left jackboot or do you want to lick the right jackboot? Those are your only two choices. Because, of course, you must obey the law and do as you're told and pay your taxes. That's the entire spectrum of ideas most people will ever hear. if all they do is watch legacy media BS, whether you're talking about CNN or Fox or any of the flavors of statism. If on a daily basis they started to hear people explaining why this is all bogus, you're not obligated to obey these psychos. You're not obligated to pay tribute to them and give them your money. Then the idea spread really dang fast. So in my hypothetical, if it was only 10% and stayed 10%, the empire collapses. But it's way worse for tyrants than that, because when it's 10%, it's going to be 100% really damn quickly. And then the idea of disobeying and resisting at some point becomes meaningless. Well, who are we disobeying? Well, there's some politicians somewhere who they think we're supposed to obey them. Do they have any enforcers? No, because none of them believe in it either. Is anybody obeying them? Well, no. Is anybody giving them money? Well, no. So they're not really a threat that you have to resist. It's just a few psychos in a corner somewhere insisting that they have the right to rule the world and everybody else just ignoring them. And it doesn't even matter. We don't even know they're there, because why would we pay attention to some babbling, psychotic, delusional pieces of crap insisting that they are our rightful lords and masters when nobody believes them? And that is how statism will end. And it's the only way statism will end. Because all the games inside the field of politics are, by their very nature, about trying to change the masters and get them to change their commands. Well, if you're still going to obey and go along with what they say, you're a slave, even if your master is a little bit nicer than last year's master. But when the people get to the point where they actually disobey and resist, that has a snowballing effect where it very quickly picks up speed and grows until it's everybody resisting. And that can happen in a heartbeat. And that's actually in more limited ways. That's happened a lot in history, where some people stood up and said, we're not going to go along with this. And other people were like, yeah, we probably shouldn't either. I mean, the American Revolution happened really dang quickly. They didn't have the internet. They couldn't just call up their friends in other states and stuff. Even with the really slow communications they had, Thomas Paine comes out with his common sense thing, spreads it around, and in a ridiculously short amount of time, all things considered, they went from a colony of mostly obedient human livestock paying a tiny little tribute to King George III to a bunch of people who were just like, screw that, we're not going along with this. And then it fell over. And in that case, there was a big violent conflict because so many people there were still collaborators and sympathizers with the ruling class. But in this case, how many of your neighbors, even devout statists, Democrat, Republican, whoever, if you decide, I'm not paying tribute to these crooks anymore, and neither are 30 some other million people, you think your neighbor is going to try to act as tax collector for the federal government or the state? No, they're just going to go, oh, wow, he's not paying. If I stop paying, will anybody notice? Boom. The whole thing falls over. That's it. There's no need for big revolution or a big political movement. Literally just human beings thinking and acting like they own themselves instead of thinking and acting like human livestock. That ends it. Which is why my entire focus is trying to get people out of the mindset of slaves so they can then act accordingly. And when enough of them act accordingly, that is the end of the insane anti-human monstrosity known as government.